All right, buckle up, everybody. We're going on a deep dive with Air Canada today.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, they're trying to reach new heights, but also be good to the environment at the same time.
Right.
So we've got a ton of documents, everything from their sustainability reports to financial statements.
Wow.
And we're going to try to figure out how this, big player in the airline industry, how they're going to thrive in a world that wants it all, profits, ain't responsibility.
Yeah, it really is a balancing act for these companies.
Totally.
They're dealing with a lot of the same things every airline is.
Right.
The economy's always up and down.
Of course.
And you got to constantly innovate to keep up.
Definitely.
But what's kind of cool is they're really going all in on sustainability.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Which honestly sets them apart from a lot of other airlines.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Let's do it.
One thing that really jumped out at me was this whole thing about sustainable aviation fuel.
SA, yeah.
Yeah, SF, they've signed this deal with Neste to buy 77.6 million liters of it.
Wow.
Which is a lot, right?
That is a lot, yeah.
So what that tell us about their strategy?
Well, I think it shows they're serious about, actually reducing their environmental impact. Not just saying they care, but really doing something.
Right.
And, SAF is made from renewable stuff.
Okay.
It's way better for the environment than that old jet fuel.
Makes sense.
So it puts Air Canada ahead of the game, especially here in North America.
But they're also putting money into electric hybrid planes too, right?
Yeah.
They're going to buy 30 of these ES-30s from Heart Aerospace.
That's right.
It seems like they're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly. Smart move.
Yeah.
Electric hybrid planes are probably going to be huge for their shorter routes.
Yeah.
But the tech is still, being developed.
Still got to work out the kinks.
Yeah, exactly. So by investing in both SF and electric hybrid, Air Canada is basically saying, hey, there's not just one answer here.
Makes sense.
They're trying out different things to get to a more sustainable future.
And it doesn't stop there, right? They're the first North American airline to invest in carbon capture tech.
That's a big one.
Through this partnership with Airbus, they're basically trying to suck CO2 right out of the air.
Yeah, carbon capture is still a bit controversial.
I can imagine.
Some people say it's not practical or cost-effective enough.
Right.
And they say we should be focusing on just reducing emissions in the first place.
Which makes sense.
But Air Canada seems to be thinking every little bit helps.
Yeah.
And they're willing to try it out.
It's like they're saying, we're doing everything we can, even if some of this stuff is still unproven.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
It's a bold move for sure, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
So they're definitely focused on sustainability.
Big time.
But what about their, money situation?
Right, the financial.
If they've managed to, really cut down their debt.
Yeah, dramatically.
And they've got a good chunk of cash just sitting there.
Yeah, very healthy.
But I also noticed this whole thing about forward-looking statements.
Right. Those are important to pay attention to.
What's that all about?
Basically, they're saying, hey, we're making these predictions.
Okay.
But the airline industry, it's unpredictable.
It's true. So many things can happen.
Exactly. Who knows what'll happen with the economy or with the exchange rate for the Canadian dollar.
Yeah, it all connects.
And those things can change quickly.
Okay, so how are they dealing with all this uncertainty?
Well, they're being pretty proactive about risk management. They're using all sorts of financial tools to protect themselves from, the market going crazy.
Like what kind of tools?
Things like, foreign currency options and swaps.
Okay, I've heard of those.
So they're not just sitting back and hoping for the best. They're actively trying to manage these risks.
That makes sense. It's like putting on a helmet before you ride a bike.
Yeah, a good analogy.
Right.
They're trying to control what they can and minimize the risks they can eliminate.
It sounds pretty complicated, though.
Oh, it definitely can be.
I'm starting to see why they use all these fancy terms like adjusted EBITDA and free cash flow.
It's just different ways of looking at a company's financial health.
So it's not just about the bottom line.
Right. There are multiple angles to consider.
So they're trying to stay ahead of the game financially while also making these big investments in sustainability.
Yep, they're juggling a lot.
That sounds like a tough job.
It is, but it also shows they're thinking long term.
I see.
They're not just worried about surviving the next few months.
Right.
They're thinking about how to thrive in a future where sustainability is non-negotiable.
And speaking of adapting to change, their passenger numbers are way up from last year.
That's great to see.
Plus, their cargo division is booming.
That makes sense with all the online shopping these days.
Yeah, e-commerce is huge.
It's a smart move for them to diversify their income.
I agree.
So they're not just relying on one thing, and it shows they're paying attention to what's happening in the world.
It also seems like they're trying to attract a wider range of travelers.
How so?
Well, they have this program called Sunflower.
Right.
Which helps passengers with, disabilities that might not be obvious.
That's awesome. It's about creating a more inclusive experience for everyone.
Exactly.
It shows they're recognizing that their customers have diverse needs.
It's honestly impressive how Air Canada is managing all these different parts of their business.
I agree.
It's like they're building a plane while flying it.
Perfect analogy.
Right.
And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
Totally.
We're getting a behind-the-scenes look at how a major airline is dealing with some of the biggest challenges in the world.
Like climate change and economic uncertainty.
Exactly. It's a lot to handle.
And they're not just sitting around waiting for things to happen.
No way.
They're taking charge and shaping their own future.
They're making choices now that will affect them for years to come.
That's true of any business, really.
Absolutely, but especially in an industry as dynamic as aviation.
Speaking of the future, we haven't even touched on their risk management strategies.
Oh, yeah. How are they dealing with all the turbulence in the airline industry?
Right. It's not all smooth sailing.
Definitely not.
They're using all these financial tools to try to navigate it.
That's where things get really interesting. They're not just crossing their fingers and hoping for the best.
Because what are they doing?
They're using these things called foreign currency options, swaps, forwards.
Okay, I've heard of those, but I don't really get them.
It's basically a way to protect themselves from market fluctuations.
So, like, if the Canadian dollar suddenly drops.
Yeah, exactly. They've got some protection built in.
That's smart.
And they're not using these tools to gamble or anything.
So not like playing the stock market.
No, it's purely about mitigating risk.
And I heard they're doing something interesting with fuel prices, too.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one for airlines.
They're using these things called derivative contracts to basically lock in a price for fuel.
Exactly. It's called hedging. So they're not caught off guard if prices suddenly spike.
That makes a lot of sense. Fuel is such a huge expense for them.
It is, and they're hedging up to 75% of their projected fuel purchases for this year.
Wow, that's a lot.
They're serious about managing this risk.
And they're doing similar stuff to manage the risks from currency exchange rates, right?
Absolutely. They're using options and swaps to minimize the impact of those fluctuations, especially with the Canadian dollar being so unpredictable.
It's a lot of money riding on those exchange rates.
It is. They had agreements to buy almost $6 billion as of December 31st.
$6 billion. Wow, that's a lot of zeros.
They're pulling out all the stops to keep those finances steady.
And they're doing more than just that, right?
Oh, yeah. They've got a whole system for managing interest rates, too.
Using a mix of fixed and floating rate debt, plus these things called interest rate swaps.
That's right. It's all about diversification and finding the right balance.
Yeah.
And to minimize credit risk, they're spreading their bets across multiple counterparties and doing regular credit reviews. They're really covering all their bases.
Plus, they're using derivative contracts for overall risk management, managing their pension assets, and applying these accounting standards called IFRS 16 for lease accounting.
It's a complex web of financial strategies.
Makes my head spin a little.
It highlights just how much goes into managing the finances of a big airline.
So many moving parts.
They have to be ready for anything.
Before we get into their specific economic assumptions and potential risks, let's take a breather and absorb all this information.
Good idea. It's a lot to process.
We've covered a lot of ground already.
We have, and it's important to pause and reflect before we dive into the more speculative aspects of their future.
So we just spent some time unpacking how Air Canada is dealing with all those financial risks.
It's impressive how proactive they're being.
It really is. But they're also making some pretty big bets on the future.
Absolutely, those forward-looking statements.
Yeah, those, what are they banking on? Like, what are their assumptions?
Well, a few things.
Okay, lay it on me.
One is that Canada's GDP is going to keep growing at a moderate pace in 2024.
Makes sense. They need a healthy economy.
Exactly. And they're also assuming a certain exchange rate for the Canadian dollar.
How much?
1.33 Canadian dollars for every US dollar.
Interesting.
They need to factor that in, especially with so much of their business being international.
Makes sense. And what about fuel prices?
Ah, yes. The big one for any airline.
I can only imagine.
They're working with an average jet fuel price of $1 Canadian per liter for their predictions.
So basically they're saying if fuel stays around this price, we should be good.
Right. But of course, those are just estimates.
Reality could be very different.
Like, exactly. So many things could happen.
Okay, so let's talk about those things. What are some of the risks that could really throw a wrench in their plans?
Well, their financial reports actually list a whole bunch of them.
Like what?
Everything from global events to just the inherent uncertainties of the airline industry.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot that can go wrong.
It's a long list. They're definitely not sugarcoating it.
I guess that's just the nature of the business, though, right?
Absolutely. Airlines are incredibly vulnerable to things outside their control.
I see. So they're basically saying, hey, we're doing our best, but anything could happen.
Exactly. It's all about transparency.
That makes sense. But there was one specific risk they mentioned that I wanted to ask about.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
These restrictive covenants.
Ah, yes. Those.
I'm not really sure what that means.
Think of them as like rules that limit how Air Canada can use its money.
Okay, like what kind of rules?
Well, for example, a restrictive covenant might say they can't buy another airline without permission from whoever lent them money.
So the lenders have some control over Air Canada's big moves.
Exactly. It's a way to protect their investment.
Makes sense. So with all these potential risks, why would anyone invest in Air Canada?
That's the million-dollar question.
Or maybe the billion-dollar question.
Right. It's a balancing act. You have to weigh the potential rewards against the risks.
So on the one hand, they have a pretty solid track record.
They do. They've been around a long time. They have a strong network of routes. Their fleet is growing, and they're taking sustainability seriously.
And they're not just sitting back and letting the market toss them around. They're actively managing risks.
Exactly. They're not just hoping for the best.
But on the other hand, the airline industry is notoriously unpredictable.
It is, and no one has a crystal ball. So there's always a chance that things could go south.
So it sounds like there's no easy answer.
Not really. Informed investors do their research, they dig into the details, and they make decisions based on a clear-headed assessment of the situation.
So no emotional investing.
Ideally not.
All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about Air Canada's sustainability efforts, their financials, their operations, and the risks they face.
It's been a pretty comprehensive deep dive.
What's the big takeaway here? What should someone walk away understanding about Air Canada?
I think the key is that Air Canada is a company in transition. They're trying to find a balance between recovering financially and becoming more environmentally responsible.
And they're trying to do all of that while the world around them is changing like crazy.
Exactly. They're making bold moves, but they're also being realistic about the uncertainties ahead.
It's like they're building a plane while flying it, which is a pretty amazing feat if you think about it.
That's a great analogy, and it's what makes this deep dive so interesting. It's a story of innovation, adaptation, and resilience.
And it's a story that's still being written.
Exactly. We're just seeing the beginning.
So what advice would you give to someone who wants to learn more about Air Canada, whether they're thinking about investing or just curious about the company?
I'd say go beyond the headlines. Look at their investor presentations, read their quarterly reports, really get a sense of their long-term strategy and the challenges they're facing.
It's like taking a peek under the hood.
Exactly. You want to understand how the engine works.
And that's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive.
This deep dive into Air Canada has been particularly fascinating. It's a great example of how a major company is trying to tackle some of the biggest issues of our time, like climate change and economic uncertainty.
And it's a reminder that even in the face of those challenges, there's still room for innovation, growth, and even a bit of optimism.
Absolutely. There are reasons to be hopeful about the future, and Air Canada seems determined to be a part of it.
But for now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that really resonates with me, the human side of this industry.
What do you mean?
Well, it's easy to get caught up in the numbers and the financial strategies.
Right.
But at the end of the day, we're talking about an airline that connects millions of people around the world.
That's true. It's easy to forget about the people when we're analyzing balance sheets and risk assessments.
Each one of those passengers has a story, a reason for traveling.
Absolutely. It could be anything from a family reunion to a business trip to a dream vacation.
And let's not forget about the thousands of employees who keep Air Canada running.
Oh, yeah. The pilots, the flight attendants, the ground crew, the mechanics, the customer service agents, they're all essential.
It takes a whole team of dedicated people to make those flights happen.
Their expertise and hard work are the backbone of the operation.
It's a good reminder that behind every successful company are real people working hard to achieve a common goal.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
We were talking about the people,
Yeah.
the ones who make Air Canada tick.
It's easy to lose sight of that when you're looking at all the numbers and financial stuff.
Totally. But those passengers, they all have a reason to fly.
Of course, every ticket represents a journey, a story.
Family reunions, business trips, vacations, who knows?
Exactly. And each one of those trips is important to someone.
And we can't forget about the people who work for Air Canada.
Yeah, all the employees.
The pilots, the flight attendants, the mechanics, the baggage handlers.
The customer service agents, everyone.
They all play a crucial role.
Absolutely. They're the ones who make it all happen.
Without them, those planes wouldn't leave the ground.
It's a huge team effort.
It really is. And it's a good reminder that behind every big company, there are real people.
Working hard, making things happen.
Exactly. So with all that in mind, what do you think the future holds for Air Canada?
Well, predicting the future is always a bit tricky.
Especially in the airline industry.
Right. It's so unpredictable.
But where do you see them going, say, in the next 10, 20 years?
Well, if I had to guess, I'd say they're in a pretty good position to remain a major player.
Okay, why do you think that?
They've got a lot going for them. They're investing in sustainability. They're adapting to the market.
And they seem committed to delivering value to their shareholders.
Exactly. They're ticking a lot of the right boxes.
But we can't ignore those headwinds we talked about.
True. Those challenges aren't going away anytime soon.
The economic uncertainty, the fuel prices, the pressure to be more eco-friendly.
It's a lot to handle.
How do you see them navigating all of that?
Well, I think their willingness to innovate is key.
Okay,
They're embracing new technologies, like those sustainable fuels and electric hybrid planes.
it's like they're not afraid to experiment a bit.
Exactly. They're not stuck in the old ways of doing things.
So would you say you're optimistic about their future?
I'd say cautiously optimistic.
Makes sense.
The airline industry is always going to be a bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah, ups and downs are inevitable.
But Air Canada has the experience, the resources, and the vision to ride it out.
They've shown that they can adapt and learn from their mistakes.
And that's crucial in any business, but especially in this one.
Well, folks, there you have it.
That was quite a deep dive.
We've explored Air Canada from top to bottom.
Their sustainability efforts, their financials, their operations, their risk management.
We even touched on the human side of things and tried to predict what the future holds.
It's been a fascinating journey.
I hope you've all learned something along the way.
I know I have.
I'm definitely walking away with a better understanding of what makes Air Canada tick.
And the challenges and opportunities they face.
Absolutely. So if you're interested in learning more,
don't stop here.
Check out their investor presentations, read the reports, stay up to date on the latest news in the aviation industry.
Knowledge is power.
And that's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive.
Empowering our listeners with information.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep learning.
And keep those wings soaring.
Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into a different corner of the world.